Good evening from Wolfville and Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. It is December 6th, National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. Also noting that from November 25th, International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, to December 10th, International Human Rights Day, is the 16 days of activism in answering the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls' calls for justice to end the violence against Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people. Before we get started, I would first ask our panelists and visitors to take a moment to remember and commemorate the lives of the 14 women murdered on December 6, 1989 at École Polytechnique in Montreal. Violence against women is as prevalent an issue today as it was 32 years ago, with staggering statistics of 1 in 3 women worldwide experiencing physical and sexual violence, with even higher rates of violence against Indigenous women and girls. We must all play our part in understanding that this is a problem, and more importantly, playing a part in making this a better world for all of us. My name is Una Proudfoot, and I identify as she, her, hers. I am the Executive Director of Alumni Affairs in the Office of Advancement at Acadia, and I am delighted to be here this evening with a panel of guests acknowledging and celebrating International Day of Persons with Disabilities, which was this past Friday, December 3rd, an international observance promoted by the United Nations since 1992. The observance of the day aims to promote an understanding of disability issues and mobilize support for the dignity, rights, and well-being of persons with disabilities, thus also contributing to helping make this world a better place. Before introducing our panel for this evening, though, I would like to take a moment just to cover a few housekeeping items. I have already mentioned that you, as participants, if you could disengage your camera and your microphone, just as we get the discussion going. We do want this to be an interactive conversation, though, so if you have questions or even comments or observations, please feel free to engage your camera and your microphone. You can raise either your virtual hand or your actual hand, and I'll keep an eye out for it. If you're not comfortable with that, by all means, please just launch your chat function, and that's usually a text bubble at the top of your screen. If you click that, it will open the chat function, and by all means, if you have a question or a comment or an observation, you can also share it there. We've also entered your names into a draw, and we will announce the winner at the end of the evening, at the end of the hour, and let you know what your prize is. So now on to our guests, each bringing their own experience and perspectives with projects, life experiences, research with and about persons with disabilities. So joining us in no particular order is Miss Melanie Jackson, class of 1999 and 01, a proud member of the Acadia alumni community. She is currently the Senior Alumni Officer in the Office of Advancement at Acadia, so one of my colleagues. Although she wears many hats, she is most proud of her role as a mother and advocate. Her son Ewan has autism spectrum disorder and ADHD and is a longtime participant of the Acadia Sensory Motor Instructional Leadership Experience at Acadia, the SMILE program. Next up is Mr. Bailey Feltmate, a 2020 Acadia grad who plays professional football in the CFL for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. He is working to become a physician assistant or chiropractor. During his time at Acadia, he was a SMILE leader and became a leader in the overall program management and implementation. He has continued to educate and advocate for physical activity and health in all aspects to youth in his community through coaching multiple sports teams. And a heartfelt congratulations on your win over Toronto and for advancing to the Grey Cup this Sunday against Winnipeg.
Thank you.
Miss Emily Duffett graduated from Acadia in 2013 with an MA in sociology, focusing on barriers to employment for persons with disabilities in Nova Scotia. She's also completed her undergraduate degree at Acadia, and when she graduated in 2011, was the first full-time student in a manual wheelchair without a full-time assistant to graduate from the campus. She returned to Acadia in 2017 to work as the testing coordinator with Accessible Learning Services, and in her current role, she coordinates the Work Integrated Learning Program to support employment opportunities for students with disabilities at Acadia. And rounding out our esteemed panel this evening, we have Dr. Emily Bremer, is an incoming assistant professor in the School of Kinesiology at Acadia. She received her PhD in kinesiology from McMaster in 2019, prior to completing a postdoctoral fellowship in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education at University of Toronto. Her research seeks to improve the health and well-being of children and youth through increased participation in physical activity, with a particular focus on individuals experiencing disability. So welcome to one and all, and thank you so much for being here this evening and sharing your time with us. We do appreciate it. So what I'd like to do is start by asking each of you if you would share some comments or some insights rather with us, and tell us what International Day of Persons with Disabilities means to you. So in no particular order, I'm going to ask Dr. Emily Bremer to begin.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have tonight. Really, the day means to me is just, thinking about raising awareness for individuals with disability, and providing an opportunity for a little bit more increased advocacy. And I think that, we don't need to think about this on just one day of the year, that really every day we should be thinking about how we can incorporate individuals with disabilities more fully, more equitably in all aspects of society. And I think that's hugely important. And I think that having the International Day itself on December 3rd is really just an opportunity to bring that to the forefront and really raise awareness around the public more broadly on what some of the issues are that individuals with disability experience, and some ways that we can move forward to more fully include individuals with disabilities, again, in all aspects of society, and really what are the most equitable ways to do this. So I think about it as a day of just a day of awareness and advocacy, and how we can move forward to making it more at the forefront of everyone's mind on not just one day of the year. So those would be my kind of general thoughts on what it means to me.
Thank you, Emily. And you certainly hit on, I think, one of the main points, in that it is one day that hopefully creates a response in people that it becomes forefront of mind on a daily basis. So certainly appreciate that perspective. Next up, I'm going to ask Melanie Jackson for your insights.
Thank you, Una. For me, I think it's a day to celebrate diversity and just uniqueness, and I think that that's important to do every day as well. And like Emily said, I think we've done a lot and we've come a long way in terms of improving awareness of disabilities, but we still have a long ways to go in terms of getting to a point where we're doing better with acceptance and inclusion. So I think on Friday, I spent a lot of time thinking about that as well. But one thing I did reflect on Friday was how lucky I feel, because I've met so many people as a result of this journey since my son was diagnosed with autism 8 years ago. And, thinking of the educators that I've met along the way, the specialists, the speech language pathologists, the occupational therapists, the educational assistants, the families that are on similar journeys, the people that I've met that have disabilities that can share so much with me, so much insight into what it's like, and also just the community members that are going above and beyond to include people with disabilities in their programming. And I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Randy Cross, who's on the call today. Randy's an alum, and he is the national coordinator for Challenger Baseball, which is an amazing program that's funded by the Blue Jays Foundation, and it's an opportunity for children with disabilities to participate in a baseball program that is absolutely amazing. So I'm just grateful for people like Randy, like Roxanne Seaman, like Andrew Roach, who they coordinate the SMILE program, just people that are going out of their way to make things accessible for everyone.
You know, Melanie, and I'm so pleased that you shared that description and that background and that experience of yours, because I know we've had many conversations along the way about these people that you have said, you know, it's just amazing how committed folks are in this particular regard. So appreciate that shout out as well. Thank you. Next up, we have Emily Duffett, please.
And remember to go off mute at that time. So again, thank you, as Emily said, for having this discussion tonight. I think this is something so many people don't realize the impact that disability can have. Even though I think the stat is now 30% of Nova Scotians live with some sort of disability. That was a shock to me even the other day. We have the highest population of disability in the country. So I think it's the International Day of Persons with Disabilities is, as I said, a day to bring awareness to build that community around building the supports around the understanding, creating the advocacy. And as I learned when I was a student at Acadia, that accessibility is not an individual fight, that you do have a community that is, you know, there to help support and move things forward. Yes, in many ways it can still feel like an individual fight, because as I've had many people tell me over the years that they would never have considered something if they had not been hanging out with me. So I think it's just a way for us to bring awareness, to educate, and to celebrate, to acknowledge that it does have an impact, but it doesn't always have to be seen in a negative context. That it can be, like, I know for myself, it's giving me my purpose. It's helping me it's driven me to what I'm doing now. So I think it can be, it's a very rounded situation for me. Sorry, that's not the best way to put it.
Well, Emily, I totally clearly appreciate your perspective, and as you say, it's driven you for what you do now. So we're going to hear a little bit more about that further in the conversation. I think I'm still stuck a little bit on, feels like only yesterday that you graduated with your undergrad, so I'm not sure where all that time went, but we can talk about that together over a cup of tea someday. Bailey, that leaves you pulling up the rear to share with us what this day means to you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I first off want to thank you and Katie Alum for putting this together and having me here, and thank everybody else. You all touched on obviously some great points, and we all know that, like, there's a ton of barriers for persons with disabilities, obviously. Ones that I kind of reflected on were obviously inclusion, accessibility, and just overall education on persons with disabilities, and advocacy for that. So this day obviously it's just one day, but it's a good foundation, a good platform to get the word out there, to get it spread out, to educate people, to educate yourself on what you can do, kind of thing, moving forward. And I would like to thank, like, my mom, who's also on this call, who has taught me so much about persons with disabilities and advocating for them and being the best person I could be. Obviously thanking Andrew Roach and Roxanne for doing what they do for the SMILE program in Acadia University too. So yeah, it hits home. It's been in my family for such a long time, and I consider myself a big advocate and help wherever I can.
Awesome, Bailey, thank you. And each of you have touched on, and certainly you, Bailey, in your final remarks about education, advocacy. Emily, you mentioned celebration. And when I look to each of these virtual events and discussions that we have, I look to hit on at least one of three things, and that's education, celebration, or call to action. And if we can hit on all three, then it's knocked out of the park. I probably should have come up with a football reference there. It's a touchdown if we can hit all three. So, you know, for folks on the line, and for each of us, you know, primarily me, not the panelists, because you're already doing your part, is to think about what the call to action is, and to think about, once we have this discussion and this conversation here this evening, what each of us can do as we carry on in our everyday lives. So thank you, each of you, for that. So the next thing that I'd like to do is just start posing some questions of each of the panelists, if I may. Don't worry, don't get too nervous. I really just want you to speak to us from your experiences, from your heart, from your intellect. The next two questions are for each of the two Emilys. So how did you end up where you are in terms of your vocation? And I'm going to start with you, Emily Duffett, because you did say that it drove you to your purpose. So let's start with you, and then once we hear with you, Dr. Bremer, if we can hear from you, how you ended up doing what you're doing and specifically your area of interest. So Emily Duffett first.
Yeah, good, thank you. So as Una said in the opening remarks, I was the first full-time student in a manual wheelchair without a full-time assistant to graduate from the Acadia campus. In the then I believe 172 years it had been open. And full disclaimer, Acadia was not my first choice of school. I was like, because I thought because of the physical structure of the school, I would be seen as a girl in the chair. You know, I knew the campus would present its challenges, and it did, but circumstances necessitated me going to Acadia. It's a family school, so, you know, and in hindsight, it was the best decision I could have made. But because of that, because I was Joe Davies, who worked in what was then Disability Access, she's like, you're the pioneer to tell us how to do this, to tell us what you need. And so I was very fortunate to be able to work very closely with the school and a number of departments on the campus to really carve out how we could improve accessibility, how we could work together to make things more accessible, to make it work for me, but other students in chairs that would come. I'm happy to say by the time I graduated, I can't remember, sorry, if it was with my undergrad and my master's, there was actually 5 people in chairs, but so I was quite happy with that. But so then it allowed to just kind of build on that, and then through that, working closely with my thesis supervisors who flat out told me they had no experience in disability, but were willing to work with me on exploring that topic. And then just kind of it kept snowballing from there, and it led to doing some provincial and national work, board work, to help increase accessibility, not just within the education realm, but more generally as well. And then as in 2017, James Hanford reached out to me that they had a urgent staffing need with accessible learning. So it allowed me to come full circle to come back and to contribute in a different sense to the institution that helped me set me on my path, kind of thing.
Well, we're very lucky to have you, Emily. And as I say, I remember meeting you as a student, and you didn't have, as you said, a full-time assistant, but the person who was helping you was a neighbor of mine. So that's how I met Emily. She was trucking along with Ryan, and I said, hey, Ryan, and then met Emily, and we've known each other ever since. So thank you for that. Appreciate that how your experiences have led you, as you said, full circle. Mm-hmm. So over to you, Dr. Bremer.
Yeah, I feel like I really kind of lucked out with my circumstances and fell into what I do, and I'm so fortunate I did, because I love the research and the work that I do and the career path I'm on. But I was always involved in sports and competitive sports and really active growing up. And then at university, I was doing my undergrad at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology. And it was in my 3rd year that I took a course on physical activity, and it was called Selected Topics in Physical Activity, that touched on a number of different areas. And that the instructor of that course was a professor named Dr. Megan Lloyd, and she was actually an Acadia alumni and was a SMILE leader back when she was at Acadia, and went on to do research in adapted physical activity and do her PhD in it. And so through that course, she shared, some of her research with children with disabilities and looking at physical activity with them, and also spoke about her experiences with SMILE. And it kind of started to click for me that this was, something that I could see myself going into career path-wise. And it was around that same time that I started coaching both soccer and hockey for programs with children with disabilities. And it was just, I honestly just had a blast with it. It was so much fun, and it was just really rewarding just seeing, the fun the kids were having, being included in these sports that they often, didn't kind of find a place on a team for. And I just, had such a good time doing that. And then combined with, I started working with this professor, Dr. Lloyd, and doing undergraduate research with her, and then turned into staying and doing a master's with her. And during my master's, I created a motor skill intervention for preschool age children with autism spectrum disorder, and got really excited about the ability to look at, what can we do if we can teach kids motor skills and help to improve their motor skills. And that really just opens the door for their ability to engage in play and physical activity, and not only on the physical side, but all the social opportunities that brings forward. So it really, I feel like I kind of fell into it, and it really just snowballed from, taking this one course and having coaching experiences, and that turned into my master's, and then my PhD and postdoc work. And now, it's really exciting that I feel like it really comes full circle with me starting as a professor at Acadia, and I'll be doing a lot of research with SMILE as well, and working closely with Roxanne with SMILE. And so yeah, it's really neat for me that initial spark came from an Acadia alumni and former SMILE leader, and now here I am in this position. So yeah, just a really kind of fortunate career path to fall into, I feel like.
Well, likewise with Emily Duffett, sounds like we're very lucky to have you, Emily. So welcome to Wolfville, welcome to our campus. And I don't know if it's because it's my job as alumni director or not, but I just got goosebumps on that whole sort of Acadia connection and that full circle piece. So that's terrific. And knowing your connection, long-term connection with SMILE through Dr. Lloyd, but also the work that you're going to be doing is a great segue into my question for Melanie. And Melanie, if you were to describe your adjustment to not only being a mom, because you had practice with Keegan before Ewan came along, but the added adjustment of being a parent to a child with a disability. Talk to us a little bit about that adjustment and where, sort of that progression and where your head was at.
Oh, that's a tough one. Ewan was diagnosed when he was 3 years old, but there was a period of probably 12 months prior to that as a mother, I knew what the diagnosis was going to be, and I was just waiting for waiting for the appointments and for that official diagnosis. And then we moved into a period of our life when we found out that he had that diagnosis, that we had to try to find services for him. And everything we read talked about early intervention. Early intervention is the key to everything, yet everything that we tried to do, we just found long wait lists. And so you're thinking in your mind, I need to be doing things, I need to have them involved in programming, but those options just aren't available, which is one of the reasons we were so fortunate to get him involved with SMILE so many years ago. He's now in grade 5, and so we've been through a lot of ups and downs with him in terms of his education, and being an advocate for him is exhausting work. It's incredibly rewarding work, but it's very challenging. And sometimes I think what Emily said, where you feel like you're going it alone, but there's other people out there in similar situations, so it's isolating in that way as well. But things are going really well now, and but our next big hurdle is he's heading on to middle school. So he's been at a very tiny school, extremely tiny school with the same students for the past 6 years. So that's going to be a big transition for him and for us. But my husband and I are both, we have education backgrounds. We don't mind having the hard conversations we need to with educators and people in the education system to make sure things are right. And so we'll just keep doing that and keep asking the questions and keep doing what's best for you. And
thanks, Melanie. And I do want to circle back around to that big A word that we've used several times already, and that's advocacy. So I'll come back to you a little bit on that one. And also just want to say, I've said many times along the way that you and having a mom and a dad, both as educators, I'm sure has been a sort of, you won the lottery to have you both being his advocate and certainly understanding the broader concept of education. So thank you for sharing that with us. Bailey, it's your turn. We have some idea of how you ended up where you're at this stage in your life in terms of your football. But talk to us a little bit about why you got involved with the SMILE program and why you kept going back year after year and ended up in sort of a senior role within the SMILE program.
Right. So I guess I sort of touched on this earlier. My mom working with persons with disabilities with their activities of daily living and stuff. So she would take care of all that on a daily basis. So I got to be involved in that at an early age. And I guess I didn't realize it actually happening, but subconsciously led me to wanting to get involved into the SMILE program as soon as I found out about it when I got to Acadia. And as soon as the first night I went to Acadia, I remember I was with a young boy with Down syndrome. He was 5 years old, and it was the most beautiful experience I've ever had in my life. Still to this day, he makes me smile whenever I get to see him. Even in my fourth year, they'd ask me to go hang out with him and work with him if their instructor couldn't show up. So that overall, yeah, I'd say it was due to my mom and definitely, and my sporting background. Just because SMILE's big purpose is physical activity, cognitive skills, and social skills. So like seeing that first night was just a beautiful moment. The happiness that all these children, all these adults had there was absolutely beautiful. So it just made me want to keep coming back and getting more involved and being able to help as much as I can, because it was just such an amazing program and an amazing feeling. And an awesome place where I could learn myself and try and help educate all the new instructors and leaders there as well.
So you've touched on my part B question for you, Bailey, and that's about sort of that conversation or that leadership with the new instructors, with the new SMILE leaders, and a little bit about sort of what went through your mind when you were in your third and fourth year and you had new SMILE leaders coming on. Did you have any sort of messaging or any sort of motivation or any sort of time with them to sort of prepare them for what they were about to experience like you?
So it is very brief. We have a very brief amount of time because obviously everybody's a student, so they have to go on and do their own thing. But with the brief amount of time that we've had, we'd usually just let them know to take their time and not get frustrated with anything happening, because you have to get to know this person and they'll get to know you. So just let that happen organically. And obviously you'll work through all these challenges, but in the end, you'll both learn from each other. So just take your time with it and know that everything will be okay. So you don't need to worry or freak out about anything.
That's great advice, and I'm smiling and nodding and thinking about my younger son, who's now a SMILE leader, and some of the stories and experiences that he shared with me. So really appreciate that. I'll pause for a moment just to say two things about questions. So just to remind participants that you are absolutely welcome to pose questions at any point in time of any or all of our panelists, either verbally, auditorily, I guess I should say, or by the chat function. And the second thing is to say that if any of our panelists have questions for the other panelists, please feel free to chime in and share that or pose those questions rather. I got a little distracted because we have our first question. So I see that Randy has his hand up, and Randy, if you're happy to unmute yourself and ask your question, please do.
Hi there, everybody. First of all, I'm a former graduate of Acadia myself. I'm from the class of 1976, if you can think that far back. I wanted to say I'm a person who lives with a disability myself. At the time I was a student, I was still fairly mobile and my condition with physical disabilities more progressive. So over the years, I've transitioned from canes to scooters to now I use a power wheelchair to get around. But one of the things, it's really exciting, first of all, to see Acadia show recognition of the International Day by getting this panel together. And it's been interesting to hear the different perspectives from all of the panel members in terms of what you've done and how you got connected to the issues. But one of the things I'd like to get some comments from the panel members. In Nova Scotia, about 30% of the population age 15 and over are living with at least one disability, according to the last census. I'm from New Brunswick. In our province, it's 26.7% of the citizens over 15 are living with at least one disability. I've done a lot of work over the years. I've worked for different organizations. I'm supposed to be retired, but I'm currently the chairperson of the Premier's Council on Disabilities. And I find it frustrating at times when we talk to government policymakers, politicians, the private sector, business leaders. They're very surprised when we talk about the numbers. They really don't seem to be aware of just how significant a group citizens with disabilities are and why they need to be planning to make it possible for them to be included in all aspects of the communities, economically, socially, employment, housing, transportation, and all the issues that all of you guys are surely familiar with. I'm wondering, are there any brilliant ideas about how do we remind the decision makers, both in government and the private sector, to recognize that just about when you add in not only the people who actually have the disability, but their family members, their relatives, their neighbors, their friends, pretty well everybody is directly connected to people with disabilities. And yet we're still fighting battles for inclusion and the need to be recognized and not seen as charity cases, but seen as citizens with all the rights and responsibilities that citizenship involves. So I'll stop there. I'd be curious to see what people on the panel might think about how do we really raise the profile in a positive way about making sure people don't forget to plan to include and also to see people with disabilities as a market that needs to be tapped as a labor market and also as a consumer market.
Thank you very much, Randy, for that. A great insight, great question. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. Panelists, looking to see if anyone would like to jump in with an opinion on that, and certainly leave it for a moment, but I'm going to share an opinion on that as a municipal politician, if I may, Randy, but I'm going to hand it to the panelists first and see if folks have a response for you. I'm looking to either Emily or Emily. I'm thinking.
Thank you, Randy, for bringing that to the forefront, and I think it's a very it's a big one to tackle, right? That's a big question that I think we're all grappling with. But I think part of what you said is one of the best approaches is that everyone, I think, is impacted by disability in some way, by knowing somebody with a disability, whether it's a family member, a coworker, a friend, and even just thinking about the fact that most people at some point in their lives will experience disability themselves, and I think being able to make that human connection is one of the approaches that I think is often kind of a way to get through to people. So I don't know what the solution is big picture in terms of getting politicians and companies and everyone really on board and moving forward. But I think being able to make that case, person to person, and once you're able to kind of find a way with that, on a basis of that connection, of that aha moment for a person of, oh yes, my, you know, so-and-so experiences disability, or I have myself, or, you know, I think that's a way that people really tend to come around, and that's how we see change and positive steps forward. So, you know, I don't have a good answer in terms of how we solve this bigger problem, but I think, you know, when talking to people, is trying to make that that human connection is one way I've always found is beneficial in you know, getting people on our team.
Thank you very much, Emily. Emily Duffett.
I certainly agree with Emily. I think that human connection is huge. One of my favorite things I've heard over the years that really makes people stop and think is that disability is the only minority group that anyone can join at any time, whether that be temporarily or permanently. It could be, you know, as simple as breaking a leg or a traumatic brain injury. So just realizing that it's, you know, it could happen. But also I think, kind of along the lines of what Emily said, with building that connection, but also really highlighting the first voice stories, those experiences that persons, you know, live with on a daily basis, that, you know, experiences others may not realize or take for granted. You know, something as simple as, for example, like I'm in Port Williams getting to the Acadia campus that I can literally see from the end of my driveway. Most times I have to book public transport, accessible transportation, which I have to do 24 hours in advance. So it's just that added layer. And also just kind of, Randy, your question really got me thinking too. I don't know if this is a route you'd want to go, but there's a report from either 2011 or 2012 entitled Rethinking Disability in the Private Sector, which is commissioned by the federal government, and Mac Wafer, who was a Tim Hortons franchise owner in Ontario and a person with a disability himself, was one of the main writers, and he's gone on to do some amazing work in the area. This is actually the report my master's work was based on, so it's one I refer to quite often, and it talks to like building that business case. It's more so aimed towards employers, but it could certainly have applications elsewhere.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily.
Just wanted to jump in there. One of the things I see as a tool, Nova Scotia set a great precedent when they passed provincial accessibility legislation, and we're actually using your model here in New Brunswick. We have a select committee of the legislature that's already started public hearings and engagement with the disability community, and we're hoping by early next year we'll have provincial legislation, which will be complementary to the federal legislation that's already in effect, but setting standards, not just on accessibility in terms of the built environment, but employment, transportation, education, poverty reduction, and all of the things that affect so many people with disabilities. And again, raising the boat up so that we can be more able to achieve the equitable access to opportunity that a lot of other citizens take for granted. And I don't want to be seen as a charity case. I don't want to be seen as something to be an add-on when it's convenient or come in the back door. I want to make sure that government and the private sector, and I think we're making some headway there, really understand that it's a citizenship issue. And also, when we talk about employers, which you just raised, we're finally talking to them with the idea that we have a labor shortage in Atlantic Canada, and there are so many people with disabilities now who've been able to get into post-secondary education and prepare themselves for the workforce. And there's a lot more people now being hired, especially at the entry level. But we want to see people moving up into mid-management and senior positions so that they can set the bar for others. And the other thing is the effect of inclusion in the public schools means that people have grown up with their peers with disability. So they're not just a number on a spreadsheet. They're Sally and John and people I went to school with, and they're going to be, as politicians, you mentioned that being on municipal council. I'm a former council member for the city of Fredericton. When you talk to people, like the professor said, you know, make the personal connection and make people realize we're talking about real people. Yes, we can move forward and raise that bar. And like I said, I don't want the charity or even the human rights. I'm the former chair of the Human Rights Commission in New Brunswick. I want an equity model and citizenship model, and just level the playing field. Give me equal access to equal opportunity. So I'll stop my rant right there. And I just want to thank you all for your attention and for the conversation. It's been very interesting so far, and I'll look forward to see what else comes up. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Randy. And you know, hearing your history and your experience and posing your question and then hearing our panelists respond is all part of that conversation. It's all part of that moving the conversation forward and continuing to have the conversation. And you know, frankly, from a government perspective, having or forcing rather the 3 levels of government to talk to one another is a huge challenge. That's not going to be fixed overnight, but we certainly know that needs to happen. Randy, you acknowledged Nova Scotia and saying that New Brunswick is sort of following suit. Nova Scotia has stated a lofty goal by being completely accessible by the year 2030. That's not far. That's not too far in the future, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us. But you know, having pen to paper and creating policies is one thing. Actioning them is the next step, right? So we've got a couple of comments that I'd like to share with you from the chat function. We've got Denise, who says, I volunteer with L'Arche in St. John. They are having success in their advocacy work with government and community. In early September, they hosted a fundraiser and over 400 people attended. Frank McKenna was the draw and CEO Oland was the MC. There were 3 government ministers present. Progress and much needed. So thank you for that, Denise. And then we have Yuli Albert, who is a professor here on KD's campus as well. And he says the Disability Act Nova Scotia was initiated by suing the provincial government based on a human rights complaint. One of the leaders in that process was Jerry Post, who later got hired by the province as the accessibility director. So I was very honored and humbled to be in his presence just recently. And he really is, you want to talk about advocacy. I think Jerry Post has a big A on his chest. And advocacy, you know, we keep using that word, and for many people it means different things. So Melanie, I want to circle back to you as a parent and ask you, you said advocacy is exhausting, also very rewarding, but exhausting. So what does advocacy mean to you? And if you had words of advice for people who say they want to be advocates, what would it be?
I think I'll start with the second part of your question. I think if people are interested in being an advocate, they need to start asking questions, and that's asking questions of people with disabilities. It's asking questions of families with, who have children with disabilities. I love to talk about UN. I love to talk about autism. I welcome questions. So I think, if people would start asking questions, that would be a great first start. Advocacy looks, different in different situations, but for us right now, it's mostly in the education system and making sure that UN's best interests are always at the forefront, and that he's getting services that he should have, that he has a right to have. And I mentioned, I think earlier, that sometimes that leads to tough conversations. My husband works for the school board, and sometimes it means calling out colleagues who, maybe unintentionally aren't, fulfilling their mandate to provide him with the services that he requires. And so that's been difficult, and it means difficult conversations. People are generally really open to what we have to say, but we feel fortunate because my husband, Doug, is somebody that people know, and they'll listen to him. So he's a voice that, that people will listen to, and we're able to kind of make some progress in that respect. But advocacy looks different in different ways too. Recently, we ran into a situation where our drug company wouldn't cover a drug that UN's pediatrician felt strongly needed to be an option that we considered. So suddenly, you know, we're taking the insurance company to task and, you know, trying to make changes there. So, and I mean, it's something that we have no experience with whatsoever. But once again, we just rely on people that do have experience, like, you know, our physician, and we, you know, we write the letters, we make the calls, we're the squeaky wheel sometimes, but, you know, we do whatever is necessary to get what's best for you.
And I'm really glad that you used that phrase, squeaky wheel, because really in a lot of advocacy work and representing communities of equity seeking people, that's it. It's the squeaky wheel, right? And as you mentioned as well, advocacy takes many different forms. And you know, back to the SMILE program, you know, being a SMILE leader is a form of advocacy, right? It's you know, I think of the areas, Bailey, that you touched on in terms of motor development, cognitive development, and the social piece. And being somebody who's around the SMILE program and watching that social piece is huge. So I wonder if you could share a little bit about what you think or what you observed in your time with the SMILE program. What makes the SMILE program so special for the community participants? You're on mute, Bailey.
My bad. In general, obviously, for those that don't know, the SMILE program runs generally 1 day a week for certain age groups. So obviously having that one single day to be able to go with an instructor, we have the full athletics complex to ourselves, usually a theme, tons of sports, coloring rooms, sensory rooms, you can go on the rink. So there's a ton of things that you can do, ton of new things that you can try out, challenge yourself, challenge the participant. So I think the overall encompassing thing about SMILE is that it's always a constant challenge for both the instructor and the participant. So I mean, when we challenge the instructors to come up with new things to do on a weekly basis, and how they are going to go out and challenge their participant, because that's such a big thing with growing, right? So because with the program, you want to grow as a participant, you want to see your participant grow through challenges and learn to be themselves and understand themselves more and more. But you also want to educate yourself too, because that was the biggest part. I learned so much being an instructor, a leader, a director. Those 4 years of my life, I've learned incredible amounts. And yeah, the SMILE program just, I feel like, gives a lot of light and happiness to those that come on that single day. And I'm just glad that I was a part of it.
And what a wonderful opportunity for university students to experience that hands-on and that first voice. Emily Duffett, I think it was you who referenced first voice, and the experiences that people who live with a disability are more often than not happy to share and happy to talk about and happy to tell their story. And so for those of us without disabilities, yet too many of your comments is, you know, to just listen and understand and try to, you know, see the world through a different lens. And Bailey, you know, when you reference the different opportunities and the challenge, so wonderful to be able to have that opportunity to be able to place challenge on both the participants and the leaders. And that first voice piece, like I say, is a critical piece of that advocacy, and it's a critical piece of the work moving forward as well, because, you know, for those of us who may be in a potential position to develop policy or to start a conversation, to be able to have that knowledge or that understanding of somebody's experience is critical. So Emily Duffett, I want to come back to some of the resources and programs specifically that you help implement on the Acadia campus. So if I could ask you just to share with our attendees this evening a little bit about the department that you work for specifically and the resources that you offer, and then I'm going to share a little bit about another opportunity on campus called the Access Acadia. We weren't able to secure a panelist for this evening to represent that program, so I'll share a few lines about that program as well after you, Emily Duffett. Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, So I work for what's called the Accessible Learning Services on the Acadia campus. And so we're staff of now 5 people, including a manager, an accessibility resource facilitator who helps students access primarily classroom accommodations, but also the services and equipment grant that are available nationally for students with permanent disabilities. A testing coordinator who coordinates all the tests that are written with accommodations through our office, and an accessibility support advisor. So helping students to gain those advocacy skills, gain those self-academic skills, and those skills that they need to be able to succeed. And then my position, which is a coordinator for the WIC Integrated Learning Program. So this is still a relatively new program for us. We just started just over a year ago. So its aim is to help students registered with our services to gain employment readiness skills, and also for Nova Scotia students right now, subsidized employment placements. So my funding is from the province of Nova Scotia, so that's why it's for Nova Scotia students. I am looking at ways to expand that, but it's, as I say, we are still in the infancy of the program. But it's allowed to some very amazing opportunities on campus. So I have someone working in the registrar's office, someone working with the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Officer in our office, 2 people helping to create a mental health app. So it's been a very amazing experience just to really round out the services that we offer. And I should note, as I said, we are a staff of 5. We currently have over 850 students registered with our services. And for those that don't know, Acadia is a campus of about 3,500 students total. So we are reaching that 25% mark. One thing I very much value about the services we offer, and that I valued as a student as well, is that it's very, for lack of a better way to put it, very boutique service, is that we get to know the students, we understand their needs, we still do individual intakes with every single student, even though that means almost 300 intakes this year, so that we get to know the student, that they're not just a number, that they know they can come to us if there's any issues, if the accommodations aren't working, what have you. So it's something I think I'm certainly very proud of, and we've had students tell us they've come across the country to come to Acadia because they've heard of the service that we offer within accessible learning. So if anyone's interested in learning more about any of these services, feel free to reach out. And if anyone knows of any employers, I'd definitely be happy to chat.
Never miss an opportunity, right, Emily?
Yes, exactly.
You know, the growth of the department over the last several years is tremendous. You know, clearly we've got more growth to do if we've got 5 staff and 850 students registered with you. But certainly, you know, one step at a time and moving in the right direction, and certainly having you along with your 4 colleagues is a tremendous acknowledgement for our campus, so thank you. I'm going to briefly tell you about Access Acadia. It's an approximately 4-year inclusive post-secondary education option for students with self-identified intellectual or developmental disabilities who would not qualify for the standard admission to Acadia University. So the program that Emily, or the department that Emily works with, is for students who are registered full-time with Acadia in that standard, what we're calling a standard admission program. So Access Acadia is for students outside of that. And it aims to support students in experiencing the opportunities, learning, and growth that come with attending post-secondary education with their peers. As a former lecturer at the university, I've had several Access students in my class, and just a tremendous contribution to the learning in the classroom and the conversation in the classroom. So with the SMILE program, the department that Emily works with, and this Access and the Access Acadia option, you know, we certainly have quite a bit going for us at this university. Again, not to say that there's still not more work to be done and growth and expansion necessary. There's a comment in the chat function that I want to share with folks, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly, Kevin or Kevin. As the only that I know of SMILE participant as a child and then a student instructor, I'm happy to hear the program continues to grow, and the program is a real legacy for Acadia. So thank you for sharing that with us. So one of the comments that one or more of you made was around asking questions. So I'm going to take this opportunity to ask a question and ask any one of the panelists who wishes to weigh in. But I want to have a bit of a conversation in the few remaining minutes, because I'm sure you're surprised to hear that the hour has crept along very, very quickly. The word disability versus varying abilities or other words, other phrases. Share with us from your perspective, any of the panelists, the word disability. Is it okay to use the word disability? Is there a better word? Does it depend on the situation, the scenario, or the individual? Go ahead, Melanie.
As I mentioned, I have a background in education, and so during my time in education, it was drilled into our heads that it was always person first. So that's something that I was accustomed to as a teacher, and then when I had my son as well. And I have to say that I certainly try to do that myself with my own language. But if someone says, you know, perhaps that Ewan's autistic, that's not something that upsets me. What does upset me, and it's a little bit of an extension from your question, Una, is when people ask if my son is high functioning or low functioning. And that's something that makes me cringe, and it's something that I find very offensive, because autism is a spectrum. And you can have challenges on one side and be particularly strong in other aspects. And so by labeling people as high or low functioning, it totally takes for granted all of their other skills. And you know, for instance, saying someone's high functioning would mean that you're overlooking the fact that they have to work so hard on their social skills, if that's something that's challenging for them. Or if you say someone's low functioning, then that's all people can focus on is the things that are troubling or challenging for them. So yeah, for me, the word disability is one that I use, and yeah, I understand that a lot of people, you know, talk about differing abilities or special abilities, but I think for everyone it's personal what works for you, or what you might consider offensive.
Thanks, Melanie, and that's a perspective on the high functioning and the low functioning that I have heard from you for the first time, so I continue to learn from you, so thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'll say something. What Melanie was saying about high functioning, low functioning, obviously, a lot of people like to try and focus on I have found this myself, focus on the deficit of the individual themselves. So I've heard things like different abilities. I actually recently read this article about someone was saying persons with determination, because it focuses on the person's abilities compared to, and empowering them based on that compared to focusing on their deficits. So there's tons of different ways of looking at it. And obviously, like Melanie was saying, it's very personal and subjective. But yeah, I think it's a great way to try and look at it in a positive light instead of focusing on that deficit, I feel like.
Absolutely. Bailey, thank you. Emily or Emily?
I think for me, it goes back to that first voice experience, and really, like Melanie said, like, you know, what the individual prefers, what you know, what they prefer, and just keeping in mind, like, we're all individuals. We all identify, you know, in varying ways, whether we have a disability or not. So it should not define. It should not, and as Bailey said, to not focus on the deficit, but to focus on the person and the individual.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything that's been said, and I think to Melanie's point as well, like I've kind of always had drilled into me that person first language through kind of my educational and kind of career background, but I think that yeah, it's so important that as Emily mentioned as well, it's, you know, we all are able to identify in whichever way we would like to identify. So I think that, you know, when I think about my research and teaching and stuff like that, I definitely don't shy away from the word disability, and I try to always use, you know, person first language. But if you're interacting with someone who wants to identify in another way, or, you know, identify, you know, not using person first language, then I think that's totally in their right, and you know, we should support that, and that's empowering for them as well. And I think, you know, whatever we can do to help anybody feel empowered through however they want to identify is really important.
Circling full back to the human connection piece of the conversation, right? And having that conversation with each individual. I think us as a society just really want to categorize people, right? So having that conversation, and thank you for that. A couple of comments in the chat function from Nancy. I have heard disability experts say that it is really okay and correct to use the word disability. I'm sure the context is important, and positivity is always great. So to each of your comments, for sure. And Denise says, this has been an excellent conversation. Thank you, and keep up the great work at Acadia. Thank you for that, Denise, and a lovely segue to wrap up this evening's conversation. As I say, I'm not surprised that the hour went so quickly. Great conversation, great topics, only just skimming the surface. And if I went back to the educating, the celebrating, and the call to action, the first thing I want to say is thank you to each of our panelists for sharing your time, your experiences, your expertise with us this evening. Really appreciate it. And so I want to talk about, you know, the education I'm going to walk away from this conversation with, and I'm sure everyone else on the call will as well. The celebration of the International Day of Persons with Disability, and, you know, it's not just one day, but hopefully it's a day that reminds us that every day is important. And the call to action, I think, is that advocacy, right? So if we walk away from this conversation with what do I do next? If each and every one of us takes on a bit of an advocacy role, then that's going to make it seep further and further to where we really need it to be as part of the conversation. So thank you to all our participants for joining us. As I